Well, thank you, Vanda. This is something of a little tennis match as we pass this between ourselves, and I will shortly be lobbing the ball back across the net to you. Thank you. Have a good rally. Yes, not like our new star, but a little rally. We will in a minute take some questions that have come in online to Vanda, and also have an opportunity for questions from the floor here. Despite our most valiant efforts and despite the impact of technology, we're not exactly on time, and I need to make sure that we have a chance to hear not simply from Alan Ware, but also from His Excellency in concluding remarks, which I can see are well prepared and indeed highlighted. So you'll have to bear with me. And also for those who are in the room, as we are going to be staying around for a little reception, I would ask your forbearance in asking questions, because you have an opportunity not available to those who are looking at this online to talk one-to-one with people at the end of the session. And so bearing in mind that privilege, I would like to privilege those who are only participating online in terms of the questions. Contrary-wise, it's slightly difficult to find answers to questions from people who I can't see who are online. So if the questions are coming in, perhaps in a group, then those answering them from the panelists present in the room will, contrary-wise, I will give some preference to them. So I hope you follow that little summary of the tennis match so far. Back to Vanda, 30-all, I think.
Thank you. So we do have a lot of questions coming in. So we've shortened some, and we've chosen some, just because there's just not that time to answer them all. But the first question is from Erica Simpson from Canada, and the question goes: should Canada and other NATO countries work on a review of NATO's reliance on nuclear deterrence, or should we focus on our efforts for disarmament on the January NPT review conference? Thanks.
Would anybody like to pick that one up? I can't abuse my position in the chair. Well, there's a deathly silence amongst the panelists here. Your Excellency.
Very, very quickly and very straightforwardly, I don't think that there is any need for further reviews. Dr. Weber has given us a very good account of the results of the review in this country, where the result of which was not the decrease of nuclear weapons, which is the commitment by the NPT treaty, but the increase of the weapons. And this is justified by the findings of the review. Kazakhstan's very firm position: there should be no further reviews. There should be a concerted effort to stop this nuclear nightmare.
Well, that's short and sharp and exact. Vanda, could you give us maybe 2 or 3 other questions from online? And I am aware that we have a waving hand, not waving, not drowning. Vanda, can you give us 2 or 3 more?
Absolutely. So another question from the audience, from the online world, is from Eric from Kenya, and the question reads: over 2,000 nuclear weapons have been detonated on Earth. Why has this not caused a nuclear winter, or has it already caused climate change? So that is one question. And then another question is from Johannes Alkout. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And the question reads: what do you expect as outcome of the first conference of state parties to GPNW to be hosted by Austria in 2022? So that's just 2 questions from the online participants.
Well, if I might, from a technical perspective, just give a quick answer on the first one. The vast majority of explosive nuclear tests took place underground, which limited their impact. And those above ground typically were what are called in the jargon airbursts, involving relatively little contact with the ground, and they were spread out. They happened one at a time over a long period. So the atmospheric effects were small. The fallout, of course, caused the push to get tests underground. but I see my old friend Phil is waving. Jump in.
Yeah, the point I would make about that is that the key reason it didn't have the impact was because they weren't detonated over cities. Because
You took the words from my mouth. It was my last phrase.
Yeah, well, you said there weren't. They were airbursts. Well, airbursts can.
But you're right. They
cause.
didn't impact cities, indeed.
Yeah, because it's not the explosion itself that causes the climatic change. It's the huge fires that are created. So that's why they didn't create climatic change. But they created lots of other bad things, obviously.
Fab. Vanda, can you give us a couple more? Because we're actually getting through them at quite a good pace. Oh, sorry, the prospects for the Austrian meeting on the TPNW. Does anybody want to pick up that one? Well, it's good to draw the meeting next spring to our attention. And I'd be probably in this room and elsewhere wish it well. Can you give us 2 or 3 more, and then I'll come into the room because I do see a colleague who's been very patient.
Absolutely. So another question, again, from Johannes Agerfeld. And that question reads, President Biden has shown interest in adopting no first use. Is this something to promote at the NPT review conference? So that's one question. And another question is from an anonymous, and that question goes, nuclear power and nuclear weapons are embedded in international political systems like the P5. Is it realistic to create a nuclear weapon-free world?
Well, it might be a good one to end that session on. Do you want to pick up the question of no first use, David?
Yes, I think, as I said in my opening remarks, that if the P5 can be got round a table on a continuing basis, not just a photo opportunity one-off basis, but a continuing series of meetings to talk about the risk of nuclear warfare, to talk about strategic balance and matters like that. They are bound, I think, to need to address the issue of no first use, because with the exception of India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, they are the only countries which could use nuclear weapons first. So it is rather important that their policies are rigorously considered. And what is quite clear is that there will be no progress on no first use unless all those 5 show some interest in turning it into a greater reality than it is. At the moment, you have the Chinese who say that they have a no first use policy, but they don't say anything else about any other aspects of their nuclear weapons, the numbers of them, or anything else. So that doesn't create a great deal of confidence. The Russians at one stage were in favor of no first use, but seem not to be in favor any longer. The British and the French have never signed up to no first use, and the American administrations have tended to differ depending on the nature of the administrations. But I think one thing we'll need to watch very carefully is the Biden administration's nuclear posture review, which is due to come to a public conclusion early in 2022. That will be an extremely important signal as to whether this administration is interested at all in pursuing no first use, or whether it is going to stick to the previous US policies for quite a long time now of not being so.
Thank you very much, David. And I know you have another meeting to get to, so we might excuse you.
Okay,
thank you so much, David. Now we have a question from the room down here. I can't quite see your nameplate, forgive me.
Natalia Johnson, Vasant Capital, family office. My comment is, obviously nuclear is evil, created by human mind. I'm born in Ukraine, I know Chernobyl, and I think many people here probably know Chernobyl. You know, Ukraine abandoned nuclear weapons in 1894. And why I bring Ukraine now as an example is it's a very colorful example how country can abandon massive weapon arsenal. Ukraine was second or third in the world at the time. And countries, and I love UK, but UK was signatory, US, Russia, and Ukraine signed that once Ukraine abandoned arsenal, Ukraine will be protected. And I look, you know, live in history, what happened with Ukraine, Crimea. If Ukraine had, I absolutely hate nuclear powers, you know, I think it's evil, I am horrified. But in a current world, geopolitics, tactics, I don't know, I don't have answer, and I just want to bring food for thought, how important it is that if country does abandon arsenal, everyone who signed document live by it. Because I'm confident Ukraine is spoken behind closed doors. As an example, look what happened. Should we abandon or not?
It's a great question. If I might abuse my position as chair, because it's one that comes up with my students a great deal. I regret, I think that you, first of all, I'm not in a position for Kazakhstan, but long term, Ukraine was not in a position to sustain the nuclear weapons in its country because the whole support system for those nuclear weapons existed across the whole Soviet Union. So it wasn't really in a position to have a long-term nuclear weapons capability. Secondly, I would just question as to whether or not, in the same way as the Americans were defeated by a non-nuclear weapons state in Vietnam, Putin's little green men in Crimea, what is going to happen? Is Ukraine going to fire nuclear weapons or threaten nuclear weapons at Moscow because of little green men? It is not as clear-cut as it is often presented, which is not to excuse or support either side. But does anybody else from the panel want to join in?
Could I just say a word about it? Because I agree with what Dan has said to you. I don't think that it was Ukraine's willingness to give up nuclear weapons that made it more vulnerable to the actions of Russia. The actions of Russia were completely illegal. They were the more so because Russia had actually signed up to an international instrument. I know because I signed on behalf of Britain. It's called the Budapest Exchange, which said that when Ukraine gave up those nuclear weapons, Russia recognized its territorial integrity and sovereignty, and that included Crimea. So I know that is sometimes judged to mean that by giving up the nuclear weapons, Ukraine got a worthless guarantee. But I agree with Dan. I don't actually think that's a very convincing rationalization of what happened. It merely underlines the illegality of what the Russians did,
We will have more chance to discuss things informally.
Which is total.
Vanda, do you have anything more for us?
Yes, I think we have one final question about the ICJ and that whole aspect. So is the ICJ likely to address the climate change question, or are they more likely to dismiss it?
Okay.
And that's the final question from our side.
Do you want to pick up the ICJ?
Am I on? Yes. Okay, I'll be very brief. I mean, it is true that there is a tendency in the International Court of Justice to shy away from tackling these incredibly important topics, but there are avenues available. One is an advisory opinion, as my colleague Nicole and Pons talked about. And then, of course, there have been some rumblings about possibly going to the International Court of Justice with a contentious case on transboundary harm. Now, whether or not the International Court of Justice has an appetite to discuss these matters, that very much remains to be seen, but the first step, of course, will have to be taken, and that's getting there. And there are things in the works on that front, but very much remains to be seen whether the judges want to take that issue on. I mean, I'll just, maybe just 30 more seconds. It was very interesting to see with the Marshall Islands case, because the court was split down the middle on whether or not that the case against the United Kingdom should proceed to the merits phase. It was 8-8 with the president's deciding vote dismissing the case. But if you look at the dissenting opinions of the judges that wanted the case to proceed, they were very clear that they saw the issue of nuclear weapons precisely because it was such a grave international issue that the International Court of Justice should actually give its pronouncement on it. But the other 8 clearly had a different view on that. So,
thank you so much. We'll now move on to closing remarks.
Actually, so I'm really sorry, just one final thing from the online side. Dr. Philip Weber would just like to provide a brief comment on the Ukraine question, really briefly.
Yeah, I just want to say that most countries have come to the conclusion that nuclear weapons don't protect them, and in fact, they're a threat. So I think that's what I would say to Ukraine, frankly, that there's over 135 countries who've decided that having or supposedly being protected by nuclear weapons is mythical. They're not protecting anybody and they're a threat. So the only way forward is to get rid, reduce, go to zero, like getting to zero carbon. So that I think is the correct answer.
Thanks, Phil. So over to Alan, and then after a few words from him to Ambassador Isarov. And I'm sure that you will, inter alia, as they say, want to deal with the question of, is a nuclear weapon-free world realistic? So Alan, you're in a fairly, you look like you're in a greenhouse there. What sort of plants are you growing? Nothing you're smoking, I hope.
No, these are all safe plants, but thank you very much, Dan, for facilitating, and thank you, Savanda, for facilitating online. And a huge thank you to the Ambassador from Kazakhstan and the Embassy of Kazakhstan for inviting us parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation, disarmament and youth fusion to cooperate on this event and to be open to the idea of looking at the connections between those two existential threats. That is the one existential threat to humanity from nuclear weapons and the existential threat of climate change. And where not only are the issues linked, but the campaigns can actually help each other and learn from each other and build cooperation. And I was very inspired to hear from Nicole Ponce, who is a very young lawyer, who is one of the leaders of this initiative to take the issue of climate change to the International Court of Justice, inspired very much from the advisory opinion in 1996, which Rob only touched upon because there was so much from that, including that it affirmed that the threat or use of nuclear weapons was generally illegal, and that the destructive impact of nuclear weapons cannot be contained in time or space. What does that mean? Indicating the transgenerational impact of nuclear weapons, the importance of international law applying to protect not only current but also future generations. And this is all paving the way for what I think is a very exciting initiative. And I am quite confident that the judges of the International Court of Justice are actually going to take up this case. And I'm quite confident that we can win the case. But it's not there yet. There are huge political hurdles to get a case to the International Court of Justice, as we found when we tried to take the issue of nuclear weapons, and the P5 were all against us. It took a lot of work to actually get to the court. But once we were there, I think we moved the issue very much forward with the 1996 case, and I expect the same with the climate change case. Thank you so much to both the experts and also to the young, also experts in their own fields, voices. We're very happy to follow this intergenerational dialogue approach. This is not the first time we've done an intergenerational event, and to have the partnership with Youth Fusion has been wonderful in taking this forward. And so thank you to Vanda and to Nico and the others from Youth Fusion who have helped to bring youth into dialogue with those who have, like us, who have been around a little bit longer, so that we can learn from each other, support each other, and make much more effective campaigns. This has been a wonderful event. event. It is streamed, it's recorded. We will follow up with links. So for any of you who have been watching and wanted to speak more but didn't have a chance, there will be more opportunities to follow up with people following this. And hello to everybody in London. I hope that you stay on for drinks after the event and have a wonderful time to chat and to use this opportunity that we're starting to come back together in physical events or hybrid events as we emerge from the pandemic. Thank you very much to everybody.